There are cases that shake you, and then there are cases that break you. Not because of the crime itself, but because of everything that happened before it and everything that didn't happen after. A 14-year-old girl vanished from a seaside town in England. 20 years later, no one has been convicted of her murder. Not because there were no suspects, not because there was no evidence, but because the people who were supposed to protect her failed her over and over again. This is the story of Charlene Downes, and it's one of the most disturbing cases I have ever researched. Charlene Downes was born on March 25, 1989, in Coventry, England. She was one of 4 children, a sister, a daughter, a friend. Her family later moved to Blackpool, a seaside town in the northwest of England, when Charlene was 10 years old. Blackpool is the kind of place that looks bright and cheerful from a distance. The lights, the arcades, the pier stretching out into the sea. But behind the postcards, Blackpool had a darker side. High unemployment, drug use, and a level of child vulnerability that authorities had known about for years. Charlene attended St. George's School in Blackpool. By the accounts of those who knew her, she was a lively, spirited girl. She had been described as well and happy in her younger years, but life had not been easy for Charlene. At home, things were complicated. Her father, Robert Downes, was known as an alcoholic, a violent man who often fought with his wife. And the home that Charlene grew up in had a revolving door of troubled men, men with criminal records, men with convictions for assault, rape, and violence, men who Robert Downes called his drinking acquaintances. At least 16 of these men, 16, had visited the Downes family home or stayed there, all of them known to authorities for serious offenses, all of them with access to the children. Social services knew they had been involved with the Downes family since 1989, the year Charlene was born. They had issued warnings. They had made recommendations, and time again, those warnings went unheeded. When Charlene was 9 years old, she and another girl alleged they were being sexually abused by a man trusted by the family to take them to school. The man was arrested, charged with rape, but the case collapsed. The other girl involved didn't give evidence, and the abuse continued. I want you to understand something before we go any further. Charlene Downes was not a statistic. She was not a case number. She was a 14-year-old girl who had been let down by every single adult in her life. Her parents, her social workers, the police, everyone who was supposed to keep her safe. Every single one of them looked the other way. In Blackpool, something deeply troubling had been happening for years. Young girls, some as young as 11 years old, were being groomed by older men. Men who worked in fast food outlets along the promenade. They would offer the girls gifts, food, cigarettes, affection, things that vulnerable, neglected children desperately wanted, and in exchange, they demanded sex. Police would later confirm that Charlene Downes was one of 60 girls from the Blackpool area who had been victims of this localized grooming network. 60 girls. 60. Charlene had been drawn into this world by the time she was a teenager. She would often frequent the area around Blackpool's central promenade, the takeaways, the arcades, the dark corners of a town that seemed to consume its most vulnerable. Her parents later told police that Charlene had mentioned receiving gifts from takeaway staff. They said they had no idea what was really happening, but people knew. In this town, people knew, and almost no one did anything. Detective Don Fraser, one of the officers who later worked on Charlene's case, described the investigation as deeply difficult. He said, "The girls were reluctant to tell the truth. They felt they had to protect their own reputations. They told white lies, and so the cycle continued.
On the evening of November 1st, 2003, Charlene Downes was in Blackpool town center. At around 6:45 in the evening, her mother Karen spotted her on Church Street. Karen was handing out flyers for a local restaurant. Charlene was with her sister Rebecca. They spoke briefly. Rebecca said she was going home. Charlene said she was going to meet some female friends. She called them from a telephone box nearby, waited with her mother until they arrived. Karen watched as Charlene and her friends walked off together toward the Winter Gardens. That was the last time Karen Downes saw her daughter alive. According to Charlene's friends, they spent a short time together that evening before she met another friend at around 9:30 p.m. They visited the Carousel Bar on the North Pier. Police later found CCTV footage of a girl believed to be Charlene at the junction of Dixon Road and Talbot Road, a main road leading from the pier to the town center. At around 9 p.m., she was walking with an unidentified woman, a woman in her 30s, dyed blonde hair, a 3/4 length coat. That woman has never been identified. Charlene's friend told police they left the Carousel Bar together at around 10 p.m. and returned to the town center. She was last seen by her friend near Talbot Road at around 11 p.m. After that, nothing. Because Charlene was known to spend time away from home, police initially classified her as a runaway. Her disappearance was not taken seriously for several days. On November 3rd, when Charlene still had not come home, her mother Karen formally reported her missing. By then, 2 days had already been lost. 2 days in which whoever was responsible had every opportunity to cover their tracks. When police began investigating in earnest, they interviewed more than 3,000 people. 3,000! The scale of the investigation was enormous, and what they found painted a deeply disturbing picture of what had been happening to young girls in Blackpool for years. Eventually, a witness came forward. This individual told detectives they had overheard something alarming. 2 men discussing the sexual abuse of young girls. One of the men mentioned was Ayad Al-Batiki, a 29-year-old man from Jordan who owned the Funny Boys fast food outlet in Blackpool. According to the witness, Al-Batiki had boasted about having sex with Charlene Downes. And then, in words that I find almost impossible to repeat, he and other men were allegedly overheard joking that Downes had gone into the kebabs. The implication was clear and devastating. The witness also claimed that Al-Batiki's business partner and landlord, Mohammed Raveshi, had been involved in disposing of Charlene's body. Police placed covert listening devices in the men's homes and vehicles. Over 4 weeks, they recorded 52 tapes. The lead officer, Detective Sergeant Jan Beesant, spent hundreds of hours listening to those recordings. A second witness, local businessman David Cassidy, also came forward. He told police that Al-Batiki's brother had confided in him that Charlene had been murdered, chopped up, that there had been a lot of blood. Cassidy said he had then been threatened to stay silent and later offered an interest-free loan of £20,000 by Raveshi to keep quiet. That was when Cassidy decided to go to the police. In 2006, Iyad Al-Batiki and Mohammed Raveshi were arrested and charged with the murder of Charlene Downes. Police believed they finally had their killers. Charlene's family finally believed they would get justice. They were wrong. In May 2007, the case went to trial at Preston Crown Court. The prosecution laid out what they believed had happened. Charlene had been groomed, abused, and ultimately murdered by men who saw vulnerable young girls as disposable. The audio recordings were presented as the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. D.S. Beesant told the court she had heard the 2 men on tape referring to a burial place, to Big Bones. She believed she heard Raveshi say, and I want you to hear this, "I can't cope. I'm so worried. And you were the one who killed her." But the defense pushed back hard. The tapes were of poor quality. They were hard to decipher. And it emerged that the prosecution's own sound expert disagreed with the police transcription. The jury deliberated for 49 hours, over 11 days. They could not reach a verdict.
a retrial was scheduled. And then, everything fell apart. The Crown Prosecution Service revealed it had grave doubts about the reliability of the covert surveillance conducted by Lancashire Constabulary.
Serious errors had been made in how the evidence was gathered and handled. The prosecution offered no case. Albatiki and Reveshi were released. Charlene's family sat in that courtroom and watched the two men they believed had killed their daughter walk free. No conviction, no justice, nothing. The Independent Police Complaints Commission launched an 18-month investigation into what had gone wrong. Their findings were damning. Police had failed to keep proper records. They had failed to ensure the integrity of their evidence. They had used inexperienced and untrained officers. They had failed to fully transcribe the material they had collected. The covert surveillance, the single most important piece of evidence, had been handled, in the IPCC's own words, poorly and unprofessionally.
One officer was found guilty of misconduct and forced to resign. Others received warnings. And Charlene Downes remained missing, unmourned by the justice system, unavenged. But here is what I need you to understand. The police failures in this case didn't start with the covert surveillance. They started years before Charlene ever disappeared. Social services had known about the grooming network in Blackpool for years. Police had known about it. Council officials had known about it. 60 girls had been identified as victims. 60 girls, some as young as 11, being groomed and sexually exploited in a seaside town in England. And the response was almost nothing. Former Detective Superintendent Mick Gradwell later said the inquiry into child grooming in Blackpool had been hampered by political correctness because the victims were white and the perpetrators were predominantly of South Asian heritage. He said investigators were afraid of how it would look, afraid of the conversation it would start.
And so they stayed quiet, and the abuse continued, and Charlene Downes paid the price. In the years that followed, the Downes family was consumed by grief and rage. Karen Downes stabbed her husband during an argument weeks after the retrial collapsed. Charlene's brother later punched Mohammed Ravishi in the street and was convicted of assault. Charlene's sister Emma was charged with racially aggravated assault against Albatiki's brother, a family torn apart, not just by the loss of Charlene, but by the years of watching the system do nothing. In 2017, a 51-year-old convicted pedophile named Nigel Lloyd was arrested on suspicion of murdering Charlene. Lloyd had lived in a flat backing onto the alleyway where Charlene often spent time. He had previously admitted to abusing two 15-year-old girls in Blackpool around the same time Charlene disappeared. After 2 days of questioning, he was released under investigation. He was later told he was no longer considered a suspect.
Investigative journalist Joe Cusack, who made a 3-part documentary about the case for Channel 5 in 2019, initially believed Lloyd was the key to Charlene's disappearance. 4 years later, he changed his mind completely. He said, and these are his words, "Lancashire police clearly channeled us towards Nigel Lloyd, but it was a distraction plan." The documentary sparked a lot of interest in Charlene Downes, but it lay dormant until our documentary. And I think that's where Lancashire police want it to be. A reward of £100,000 still stands for information leading to the conviction of Charlene's killers. 20 years later, that reward has never been claimed. Charlene Downes would have turned 35 this year. Her mother, Karen, still speaks about her as if she's still that 14-year-old girl. "She was my baby girl," Karen said. "I miss everything about her. I just wish I could have her back." The Funny Boys Takeaway was eventually renamed, lost its late-night license. Iyad Albatiki was later convicted of assaulting a teenage girl, his former girlfriend, and sentenced to 20 weeks in prison. Mohammed Raveshi has never been charged with anything related to Charlene's death. No one has ever been convicted of murdering Charlene Downes. No body has ever been found. No justice has ever been delivered. But here's what I keep coming back to. This wasn't just a failure of one investigation. This was a failure that started years before November 1st, 2003. A failure of social services, of police, of local authorities. A failure of every adult who knew what was happening to young girls in Blackpool and chose to look the other way.
Charlene Downes didn't just fall through the cracks, she was pushed through them. If you know anything about this case, anything at all, Lancashire police are still investigating. The reward still stands. £100,000 for the truth about what happened to a 14-year-old girl. She deserved better. She deserved so much better. Subscribe to Dark Verdict if this case stayed with you. Every week, we tell the stories that the world forgot, the ones that deserve to be remembered. I'll see you in the next one.